One's ready. Go!
If there's one thing I love, it's creating content. If there's a second thing that's like 1 and 1A that I love, it's creating content with my best friends. What's up, everybody? It's Aaron back from the One's Ready podcast. I'm here with Brandon from I Came With Fire. It's fantastic. Find them everywhere. They're on Rumble. They're on YouTube. They're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. Live shows every night. Live Fire, Friday night Live Fire, 7 p.m. Eastern, 10%.
7 p.m. Pacific time. 10
Pacific.
10 p.m. Pacific. Yeah.
10. I said percent. I don't know why I said percent.
10%. But, yeah, but come 100% when you show up, dude. Come.
There
correct.
we go. You are going to catch some strays. There's going to be some stuff that they say. And I got to be honest, it's my favorite place to go when I am a guest host on somewhere. And that's not BS. It's one, because I love your beautiful face, but two, it's because we learn about stuff constantly. Something that you guys have really hit on in this last year or so. And you guys have just been absolutely crushing it. But the stuff that you guys have been hitting on has been the 5th gen warfare aspect of what's going on inside of America, in the current environment. It feels good when you feel like your side, if we say that we have a side, it feels good when you have a win, right? But then there's always that next thing. So even with the hope that I have for America, even with I had the joy to steal the losing campaigns, even with the joy that I feel about where we're going as a country, and when I see the reflections of other folks talking about where we're going, man, it feels really good. But any good pragmatist just goes right to the next thing, right? And we go to, okay, we have a lot of stuff to fix, and one of those is malign influences from other actors in the world, in the geopolitical space. I just want to open it up to you and talk a little bit about that warfare that we're seeing, and then we're going to hop into what we're talking about. Everybody, buckle up. We're gonna learn you a little bit today. We're going to talk about IP theft and how it's hurting America. But I just want to open it up to you from your aspect and from all the work that you've done, deep dives into Russia, China, especially. How do you think that we can actually affect the 5th gen warfare that we both agree we're in right now?
Right. No, that's a great way to put that, because one of the things that not enough Americans understand, and not just like American citizens like you and I are, obviously we're a little different with our military backgrounds, but just the average citizen and then our politicians don't seem to understand, is the way that Chinese approached warfare with the United States, and then anybody in general, but the United States specifically, is that the entire landscape, whether it's environmental, it's medical, it's biological, it's actual munitions, like the military industrial complex, is all an aspect of the battlefield to them, right?
Right.
And in any way that they can exact warfare and bring down pain on us in any way, shape, or form, whether that's economically or militarily, they're going to do it. And they treat it as such, as battle, because they know that all of this that we enjoy, this economy, the American economy, the world, is all interconnected. And you cannot be one-dimensional when you wage war anymore. This is not the gentlemanly style warfare where we're taking and marching out knights onto field, and then the rich people at both ends are going to, right, jolly-o, yes, after this, we're going to go. Since we're cousins anyway, we're going to leave everybody.
You had your volley, we're going to take our volley, and then we'll see, who's still staying into the end.
Exactly. See you at Christmas, Benjamin. And but that's not the way that they do warfare. And one of the ways that they do and wage it with us is with IP theft. I think it's commonly known now that the Chinese do this. It's gotten enough of the mainstream media's attention. And there's some pretty obvious things, and I've pulled up a few references so that we can show them. And because I know a lot of our listeners, especially people that listen to us, need visual aids like me.
me included. Yeah, right. Like, I'm right here, dude. I can hear you.
Right. But no, so the Chinese are very well versed and practice this all the time. And it's one of these things where it took the United States too long to realize that anything that's going on, whether it's language or economic involvement, is a style of warfare to them. And it has gone on too long without us not doing anything about it and not recognizing it and calling it out for what it is. This isn't just a lesser nation that is angry with us angsty in a teenager sort of way for all intents and purposes. This is an actually protracted and well thought out plan to undermine the United States and us as the global hegemon. Without a doubt, that is a fact. If you don't believe that, I don't know what to tell you, but it is evidenced in a lot of different ways, and we can talk about those things, but that's 100% the truth.
Yeah. And people don't understand, like we have all these smart military minds, and it's really frustrating even in my military careers. We would go to these schools and these, you'd have to go to NCOA or you'd have to go wherever. And everybody knows about what dime fill is. If you don't know dime fill, that's the way we exact our power, project our power against our enemies or our near peer competitors, China obviously being the prescient threat that we face inside of the world. And one of those is economic pressure. We can put, you saw it with President Trump and talking about sanctions, and he's using that as a bargaining chip. But the second that you talk about IP theft, people are like, oh, well, they just happen to, they just happen to reverse engineer your product and then sell it for cheaper, and I'm going to buy that. No, that inhibits America's ability to stay as the global superpower that we are. However, it doesn't come without consequence. And I think you have a couple examples, pulled up both historically and, recent history of how much IP theft they're actually stealing and damaging the American economy.
Right. Yeah. When you think about IP theft, you may think like it's like a simple way of doing it is copying somebody's homework, right? Which
Right.
is exactly what's going on. And it's funny too, because when you were in school and you copied somebody's homework, what's the first thing you said to them? Like, hey, you need to change this enough to where the teacher isn't going to recognize that this is like verbatim. And
Right.
so the Chinese can't even get that right, because I have a side by side here pulled up at the J-31, which is the Chinese fighter aircraft that's supposed to be the equivalent to the American F-35. And here, I'll pull it up so you can see. It's literally like almost a carbon copy.
Oh, that's wild.
Right. This 100%, like this line down the middle, obviously you can see the Chinese flag, American flag on both sides. There's some differences, some little differences. And the bigger differences aren't just visual. We're talking about like radar cross section capabilities. The F-35 is going through its new Block 4 upgrades, which is actually pretty incredible. And I'll just say this real fast about the F-35. It gets a bad name, but the new NGAD, the next generation air dominance fighter, speaking about fifth-gen warfare, right? The Air Force actually upgraded all of these F-35s and sort of realized that the gaps they thought NGAD was going to be filling can actually be filled by the new Block 4 upgrade for the F-35. So that's pretty incredible, I think. But so when you talk about copying homework, the Chinese haven't got it right, but it's not without lack of trying. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. They just get it wrong because, again, you can copy someone else's homework. It doesn't make you as smart as them. And there's a reason why we maintain those gaps. That allows us to have a tactical advantage over the people that we look to keep in their place, so to speak. And that sounds like a very, blunt way to say it, but America is America because all the way from the founding fathers, they understood that the commitment to IP is an important thing to have. Abraham Lincoln called patents, quote, the fuel of interest of the fire of genius. Our open market and the way that we develop ideas, patent those ideas, and then bring those ideas to market in everything, not just military space, but when you talk about every single thing, MRI machines, when you talk about, pharmacological products, and I know everybody hates big pharma, but, there's a reason why the life expectancy, thanks to pharmaceutical innovations, there's a reason why life expectancy has gone up. There's a reason why that people are healthier now, even with the problems in America that we have, they're still healthier than everybody. It's really the cornerstone of progress. So patents and other IP protections fuel innovation. They help you because they know that America is going to protect those innovations, protect your patents, and allow you to actually move the ball forward. Like imagine where, Elon Musk would be if there was no protection for his IP, for his patents, if there were no protections that were put forth in some sort of regulatory manner that allowed him the space to be like, okay, I got this rocket figured out. Now we're going to figure out how to catch this rocket when it comes back in. Like if you don't have that, somebody's going to steal it from you. They may or may not use it for nefarious purposes. You have no clue, right? But since the founding fathers of America, we have recognized the importance of intellectual property, of IP, of patent protection, all of these things. Like, the founders, of course, smarter than all of us. And as we look back, we just keep learning lessons that they already figured out, which is, that's in and of itself a wacky thing that we have to wrap our head around. But you were also mentioning right before we got on is, Russia did this sort of the same thing.
No, they did actually. Back during the Cold War, the Russians they got a hold of some designs for the F-4 Phantom. And their new MiG-23 that they made, they didn't realize that the F-4 came in a couple different versions. And one of the design aspects that they stole had to do with the F-4 landing on aircraft carriers. And the way that it used to do like the toe lock when it would like land on the aircraft carrier, it used to have to like cut something essentially to land, right? And the Russians, when they got those designs, they didn't know what that was for. And so there's an aspect on the wings that the American aircraft had to cut that line, and the Russians put it in without realizing what it was and used a totally different metal They didn't put it in the right way, and they thought it had to do with the F4 Phantom reaching a certain level of for speed. And when we basically got a hold of one of the down MiG fighters, we saw that they copied it and kind of realized that, hey, this is stolen, but they had no idea what they were stealing. And they just kind of copied and pasted what happened without realizing what it was, made it wrong, all these things. So I say that to just sort of laugh in the face of stealing our homework and trying to do it, because you can't do it as good as the United States can. And then sort of set this historical precedence that America has been leading the way for so long, that back in the 70s during the Cold War, this shit was going on. By then, our greatest rival was Russia, and nobody still can get it right, man. It's like America has been leading the way for a long time. And if I could actually bolster the point that you were making before about innovation and patents, two things about this. First and foremost, patents are meant to incentivize you to do things, because a patent gives you this small amount of monopoly for like 20 years, essentially, to where you can reap the benefits of that patent, and sort of incentivizes you to keep innovating. Okay. And the last couple of years that I was in the Air Force, I got the opportunity to work for Air Force Research Lab, and that means the innovation space. And that was probably the least micromanaged environment that I had ever worked in, because they understood that innovation needs freedom, right? And that's sort of the point that segues into my next point, is the CCP has their hands in everything.
Oh,
There
yeah.
is no incentive for Chinese tech makers, Chinese innovators to make things, because they're going to just have their IP stolen by the CCP, and it might be used in ways that they don't want it to be used. I mean, Silicon Valley does the same thing. They have all these conscientious objectives or objections to the US military using the tech that Silicon Valley makes. But with like something like civil military fusion in China, where they're going to take whatever tech it is, if it has application to the military, it now belongs to the Chinese. It's is exactly the sort of spirit that's antithetical to the open market that you're talking about, and it kills that innovative spirit, which is why in the first place they have to go to countries like ours to steal that IP.
Right. And it's not just on this grand scale. It's not just countries. It's not huge. It's not Tesla or SpaceX or whatever else. Man, it is literal like small businesses everywhere that if you
Right.
have weak safeguards over these IPs, you're going to absolutely crush them. Companies with 5 to 9 employees generate 60% more patents per employee than firms with over 25,000 workers. What does that awesome stat mean? It means that if you kill IP protections, or if we don't safeguard them enough, you're going to absolutely take out the underpinnings of the American economy, which is this small business aspect of it. So as we kind of go on here, like what's the so what? We wouldn't be talking to you if it wasn't a prescient threat, right? IP rights are under domestic attack right now. So there are efforts underway at the federal level to undermine intellectual property rights, including patents. Weakening these protections, it discourages research and risk stifling the development of critical new medical and other technologies. So critical new medicines and technologies. We mentioned big pharma earlier. One of the biggest things that we have a problem here, and you, of course, you're smarter than me on this, is the Bayh-Dole Act. So basically, proposals to misuse the Bayh-Dole Act's march in rights and seize patents over pricing disputes, not failure to develop, would upend the entire innovation ecosystem. What does this mean? The Bayh-Dole Act has a march in rights essentially, right? And you can go, I'll link it in the show notes so you can go read what the Bayh-Dole Act actually says. But man, this act, it basically has this march in rights where if there is a dispute on pricing, okay, it's not like, hey, we have this thing, we want to bring it to market. It's if somebody in the government or if somebody decides that the pricing is not correct for this product, that they can seize intellectual property and patents. That's terrifying. Because who's making the disputes? The people that want to steal your intellectual property rights. Like, it's crazy.
No, it is, man. And it's, I'm glad that you brought that up, man. So the Bayh-Dole Act has been around since 1980. And essentially what it is it's federal funding for people who are creating things in the innovation space. And those march-in rights mostly have to do with the government stepping in when whatever they gave you the money to produce, you're not producing it at the rate that you said you're going to. And it says, hey, basically you're wasting the money. We need to step in. They have the option of giving it off to another party, a third party separate from the government, or they can kill that project altogether. And now there's essentially language and legislation out there for being proposed that they can come in and say, do it over pricing, which is totally antithetical again to that open market concept that you're talking about, right? And this is just more of what we were talking about before, where this is big government stepping in and going to de-incentivize people who get into these spaces on purpose and need that federal funding, because these are really smart people just coming out of college. Maybe they got loans, all this other stuff. They need assistance financially to do these things, right? And they get the money from the government. And if the government is going to start coming in whenever it feels like maybe there's some sort of financial disagreement or whatever, and this is that slippery slope argument, they can use that march-in right that they have and take it over. And why is anybody going to want to work with the federal government in the first place? I mean, it's not like this isn't an already existing problem where private industry, especially in the tech space or the pharmaceutical space or the bioengineering space, already doesn't want to work with the federal government because it's so bureaucratically slow. This is like the last thing that we need for these people, is another obstacle to get into that space and put things out for you and me.
Right. And you know, we bring receipts here on these programs. You know that we're going to talk about specific examples. We already mentioned big pharma. We mentioned how China is actively, you know, with their 400-year plan, they plan way further out in the future. And all of this is warfare. So let's bring it back to COVID. Nobody wants to talk about the dang pandemic anymore. But during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Biden administration actually backed an international waiving of IP rights for vaccines, right? If you remember way back in the beginning of this whole thing, man, they were like, oh, well, we don't have enough. We have to produce more. So we're just going to waive all these rights. Huge misstep. Huge misstep by the Biden administration. That basically handed U.S. developed technology to nations like China and set a dangerous precedent that undermines future U.S. breakthroughs and beyond. And that's the TRIPS waiver, and it's still happening. And like China, like whatever your feelings on where COVID came from or how it happened or whatever else, China was not a good actor, no matter where on that spectrum you fall. They cost the United States more than $600 billion annually in IP theft. Not alone, you know, with the TRIPS waiver out there and us not being able to innovate in the medical space as we need to, who knows what else we could be developing. But instead, we have this huge Chinese, malign influence over our shoulder, thanks to some of these missteps.
Yeah, no, this is what the Chinese want to see, right? They'll come mea culpa on our knees, help us out. This is going on. We need your assistance or whatever. This is just as a tactic as old as warfare is. And the United States constantly kneecaps itself by coming in and saying, you know what? Okay, come on. We'll do these things. We'll lower these obstacles for you. We'll interact with you in good faith. Bill Clinton did this back in the early 90s with China. And that had more to do with sort of like working and exporting things, right? And that didn't work out either. But the Chinese don't want to see us be on the same plane. They understand that this is a very abstract concept that we can talk about at large, but we don't need to get into all of it. But the Chinese see themselves as something called the Central Kingdom. They are a very, very old people. They view themselves as being on top and having been on top for thousands of years. And there's great shame in being essentially second place in the United States. So anything that they do, it should be treated as there's an ulterior motive here, right? So President Biden and the people that advise him should know that by now. And I think they do know that. They just actively take steps that are ignorant and sort of exclusionary of the fact that anything that we do to give them any sort of leeway is going to be used against us as leverage again in the future. And that's that warfare piece you're talking about, because this is just that whole argument about giving an inch and taking a mile. We will always lose that fight because we're not treating it as a fight. If that makes sense.
No, 100%. Yeah. I want to talk fixes. I want to keep this short and digestible for folks. And we could talk about this at length. Maybe we'll come back and do like a full on 2-hour episode, really dive into a lot of this stuff. But I'm going to start from, the 30,000 foot, literally the universe, view here. The United States has to take lead on this. We have to start holding a hard line with IP theft. We have to actually agree as a nation that IP theft is damaging to everybody, not only to us and our free market society, and it supports and underpins the morals, values, and culture of the United States of America, but it's bad for the entire world. When you allow malactors, first they come for us, then they come for you. The old adage is that, hey, China may be looking at us now, but everybody really has to kind of coalesce behind the leading global hegemon being the United States of America, and say, hey, IP theft is, we are not going to do IP theft. We're going to stand directly in the face of IP theft, because as if you look at things as a net negative or a net positive, granted, geopolitics and especially IP theft, it isn't a zero sum game. But as you look at it, you're like, man, once they steal an F-35 from us, once they
Mhm.
steal patents to medications that they can't quite get right, and then they produce billions of those medications, that's a net negative for societies all over the world. And just because
Indeed.
we are strong enough to stand up to them doesn't mean that we can't be damaged by them. So everybody else is going to kind of have to get on Team USA on this one.
Yeah, no, you're right, man. And that last bit about Team USA, this is a unipolar world, and history will show you that multipolar worlds are absolutely chaotic. And the Chinese and the Russians talk about a multipolar world, and I think the end game there is to go back to a unipolar world when the United States is replaced, right? With China being at the top, but this sort of like net negative you're talking about, IP theft is bad for everybody. The United States has a ton of allies that we rely on for certain things. Everything that we do is tied in with these allies, whether that's resource allocation, it's IP sharing, not theft. It's doing things side by side. When you can't even protect your own IP, how are you supposed to incentivize your allies to step in and do business with you? This has
Right.
so many different tertiary effects that we can unpeel that onion on. But like you, I mean, it really just the simplest way to say it is what you just said: is IP theft is bad for literally everybody.
Literally everybody, right? So that's the global view. We're going to bring it down to our country here and what it is that we can do. So there's a couple different initiatives that are going on right now. Some pro innovative policies. One of them, Congress, you got to pass the legislation like the Patent Eligibility Restoration Act, or PARA.
Right.
The other one is the Prevail Act, and we'll talk about that to strengthen IP protections. These efforts need to be complemented by executive action to ensure that U.S. Patents and Trademark Office, USPTO, and related agencies uphold policies. So it's not enough just to legislate. Like, we're going to need somebody, and I'm glad to see President Trump that's coming in. He's got a whole of government approach to a lot of these issues. I'm glad to see that he's willing to use a combination of legislative, which is very, very slow, and executive actions coming directly from his office in order to protect this stuff. In your opinion, what happens if, one of those pillars falls out? Like if we use legislative and not executive action, or executive action and not legislative?
Well, there's a couple of things that stand out. First and foremost, here we have a triple tiered government for a reason, and when those things don't cooperate and one becomes more strong than the other, that's bad overall for our government system, the constitutional system we have. But the people that suffer at the end of the day when these systems break down, as always, is the little man, and
Yeah.
that small business that you're talking about. When you want something done the right way, you may end up paying a little bit more money for it, but you're going to go to that small mom and pop shop, that small business. It's going to take the time because they need your business, whereas some of these big corporations aren't going to. And that's the same with these patents, and the same with these people that are entering that space. You have the patent trial and appeal board, the PTAB. They can come down hard specifically on these smaller businesses that get these patents, and then the PARA Act that you're talking about, and then the Prevail Act is sort of there to provide more defenses for these smaller businesses so they have the opportunity to grow and aren't being trampled, right? So that's what this is. I mean, this is we can wrap that up and put a bow on it by saying big government comes down, and what it does is just squashes the little man. And one of the biggest defenses to tyranny creeping into your life is to have businesses where you can do things to create and barter and sell and do all of that on your own as a community without having government involvement. And that's one of the biggest bastions to having any sort of government creep and tyranny into your life. So this is why it's so important. These are these pillars of individual sovereignty and freedom. When we talk about we the people, the government, we the people are these small businesses, and these are mechanisms that anybody in history has used to essentially do it yourself and keep out the bigger fish, so to speak.
Yeah. And the bottom line here is that, man, there's current policies that are undermining our ability to protect those small businesses, to protect the American citizens, which by and large protects everybody else in the world too. When we set this line and hold this line with China, like nobody else can. Canada is not going head to head with China. Mexico is not going head to head with China. Every other country in the world, they are not going head to head with China. They just can't do it. So we have to be the ones to stand up, and that starts at home. It starts with understanding what these things are and why it's such a bad thing, which is why Brandon and I are here talking to you today about why Chinese IP theft is part of a bigger fifth generation war that we really have to start focusing on. So the time is now to get involved with this. How do I get involved with this, you say? Well, first of all, it's education. It's hearing the things that we're talking. Go look up the PARA Act. Go look up the Prevail Act. Go look up how much IP theft, $600 billion. Imagine what we could do with $600 billion of extra money just floating around in the budget. thank goodness the time is quickly coming to pass where we send all that money to Ukraine for a war that we don't want to be involved in. But it's neither here nor there. You got to get involved. You got to get yourself educated, and you have to start thinking the long game. We typically live, administration to administration here in the United States of America. You got to look at a 100-year war. You got to look at a 400-year war, because that's the game that everybody else is playing. And we're going to lose this fifth gen warfare, this fifth gen war that we're in, unless we start to get serious about some really nuanced topics. With that, me on my soapbox, Brandon, I'll turn it over to you to kind of close us out.
Yeah, no, I think that you said that and articulated it perfectly. We cannot be this giant that moves so slowly and fails to adapt. This is the whole Darwin thing, right? Survivability is the ability to adapt, and the United States has to adapt. The landscape has changed, whether we've dictated those terms or not, right? And we want to keep dictating terms, but some of them are being dictated to us, which is not the way things should be. And if I could just analogize what you're talking about in a different way, how many times have we watched like a football game or something like that, and your team keeps beating themselves up with these stupid penalties and letting a team that you know is inferior to you hang around at the end of the game, and then at the end of the game, you win it by a field goal or you lose it by a field goal or some dumb shit like that, right? That's essentially what this IP theft issue is between the United States and China, where the U.S. keeps having these dumbass penalties and letting them hang around. So when the end of the game comes, whatever that looks like, whether it is indeed World War III or something else, we don't have to come down to a stupid field goal or some other dumbass shit at the end. We understand that we tighten things up, stop the IP theft, bolster the people in our country that innovate and make tech and that want to keep it here because businesses are allowed to grow here, and then beat them that way. So,
man, couldn't have said it better. Everybody go check out I Came With Fire on every single platform you can find them. Follow the Instagram. Make sure to go and check out Rumble. You can find me over at Aaron Loves America on Instagram or over at ONESREADY. We appreciate you guys hanging out for this this sort of like deep dive talk a little bit, not too bad, a little digestible piece of content for you. But hey, IP theft is a big deal. I want you to look at it, and I want you to think about how we can make America the best country that's ever been in the history of the world. It's easy to get there. It's really, really hard to stay there. And this is one of those things that we can all help influence to stay on top. Thanks for coming out, everybody.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, always. Later, brother.